Corebase is part of a generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. Welcome back to another episode of the MSP Cyber Roundtable. I've got with me today Chris CJ Johnson from GTIA. Welcome back, Chris.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you.
Or maybe welcome for the first time. Yeah, you've got a new logo. So what's this logo?
We have a new skin, right? So GTIA is the renaming of what was previously CompTIA. So we are now the Global Technology Industry Association. So we are still the same association, the 40 plus years as an organization. We predate Cisco still the same not-for-profit. So really we changed in name and that's really it.
I think it's a better name. 40 years ago, it was the computer industry, right? But like almost.
It was ABCD.
Does anyone use the word computer anymore?
I think in some circles, I think if you ask them if they had a computer, they may not know what you were referring to.
Yeah.
Oh, you have an iPad. Got it.
Yeah. No, I don't have that. I have an iPhone. Yeah.
That's right. Compute device. Still confused. Is that something with Gen AI? I don't know.
Yeah, and when we say big technology, we don't usually think like aluminum refining anymore, right?
Right. How many layers of aluminum make up your compute device?
All right, so you guys are the Global Trade Industry Association, which is like perfect label. I can't wait to join the town square in person. Pretty much the same old but new name. But also you guys you're taking a moment to reimagine a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think that's actually come up. I would hate to say that sky's the limit because well, that's at least on the brainstorming side true. I think within reason though, yeah, if it sounds like a great idea, it should probably get shared with leadership because we have the opportunity to do a lot of different things that we couldn't do before. So that's exciting.
Yeah. So I can't wait. I can't wait to see that unveiled. I feel like I keep unwrapping presents, although I'm waiting for the rest of the logo graphics. As you can see, that one on the bottom right should probably be white, but it's coming.
Sure. Yeah. We'll work through it.
So I realized when I was watching the header on this video that I missed the opportunity with the slides I'm about to put up to score the biggest changes. We should have put them in bigness order, but now we get to argue about it, I think.
I think that'll make it more exciting because I think those that are tuning in may have their own opinions as well. And I don't know that we are in a position yet today where we know for sure how big some are versus others related to, how soon, like the today versus what they will look like, 90 days to 6 months from now.
All right. Well, with that, I think I'm going to jump right in because well, actually, no, let me back up a little bit. For anyone who doesn't know who you are what inside GTIA?
Inside GTIA, similar to when I was with CompTIA, similar title. Actually, the title is the same, just new name. So I'm the Senior Director of Cybersecurity Compliance Programs, which is underneath cyber programs under membership with GTIA. So Wayne Selk, who runs our team, and Lisa Person and Miles Jobjin, that makes up the cyber programs team here at GTIA.
So that means with the two of us here, there's no one to slow us down and say, "What are you guys talking about?" But we will try.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump in. So, cyber compliance updates. So, I mean, there's depending on how you want to measure these things, there's either like dozens of cybersecurity standards or hundreds of them out there. But we got some changes that are really notable that most of our viewers should at least have a little knowledge about, so they can speak knowledgeably to their customers because their customers really care about all this compliance stuff. So
Sure.
with that, in no particular order, but we can maybe like stick them in order here. We got this list, which CGI and I put together. We just ran out of time. I'm sure there's more than that, but these are all like ships moving at like giant ships moving right now, right into 2025.
One might say these are the ones that we would argue in the last 90 days to 6 months have been pretty noisy.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. But I'm always surprised every year at what seemed like was going to be big and ended up being a non-issue, and what like didn't seem like it was going to be a big deal and turned to like turn a whole place in the planet upside down.
You mean like the
So
one we didn't even list? I think we didn't even list NIST 2.
yeah, well, yeah. So I got really excited about NIST 2.0
Right,
because
so did I.
I hated 1.1. There was just a few problems with it. They were a problem enough that it made it difficult to use NIST 1.1. And then we had this huge opportunity, and basically the things weren't resolved, and or not resolved enough. And in addition to that, unlike NIST 1.1 that the whole world got excited about, it seems like no one even cares. I still have people that are still scoring on NIST CSF 1.1 because they're like, I don't care about version 2.
Do you think that was more of like who was involved? I think if we go back to 1.1, I think there was roughly 20 countries or so that kind of weighed in. And then you get into NIST 2.0, and it was like they decided to get as many countries as wanted to participate. And that I think maybe got in the way. It also took forever for them to release it.
Yeah, it was 5 years late, that's for sure.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. Well, with that, I don't know if this is the one you're most excited about, but SMB 1001, which this is like the 2025 edition, which is really version 2, right? Is it version 2?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Um, Yeah, I mean it's definitely an update to the original that came out I don't know 12, 18 months ago.
Yeah. Which was did they have multiple baselines in the original? I don't remember that.
They did. So it's always been built on levels. So I think there's 5 levels, and largely it's not so much about the maturity model and the levels. It's about what you are working towards that you might need to comply with, particularly for those that would be on their journey for ISO 27001. Which, in fact, if you were on their website, that's one of the things that you would see. And to your point about excited, I'm not necessarily excited about the framework itself, and that's not to downplay the value or the importance of this. My excitement is that for the first time we're seeing an organization put something out that says in the SMB space, and obviously we could split hairs over what defines SMB. The U.S. looks at it very differently than other countries. But what's important about this is a set of safeguards that align with a cyber hygiene model that says if you're doing anything at all in the business world, these are some things that are, with no exception, being implemented in your organization, and with the understanding that you may not be able to do these things on your own. So you're either employing someone that has the skill set to help you achieve those safeguards to be implemented, or and this is where I think it adds a lot of power to the MSPs, and we'll get into this later, that are really going after a maturity model for their own organization that says we can prove with evidence that we take cybersecurity seriously, and these are the things that we put in place. So what better model than to have in the SMB world to say, hey, if I need help with this, I don't want just any IT service provider. I want an IT service provider that's taking this type of opportunity seriously within their own organization.
Yeah, and I think there are some other attempts at this for small businesses being
For sure.
prescriptive, but what's notable at SMB 1001 is it rolled in a lot of lessons learned, and I would argue we had CIS IG1, which was really not built for small businesses, but was built for service providers and assessors that are going into small businesses. But it was a high, it was and still is a high standard to reach for.
And which one
And
was that? I missed what you said the first
so
part.
CIS implementation group one. So and they say if you do this, you're going to block something like almost 80% of the
Yeah, it
minor
was above
trade.
80%.
Yeah,
But
and
I think it's fair though to point out though, if you look closely, especially as they rolled to 8.1 and created some clarity around what those things are, a lot of that goes back to it's not even cybersecurity specific. It's really more about the business risk and the things that as a business you need to do from the context of governance. Like
mhm.
having an inventory is not a technical requirement, right? Like it's not like, hey, you should do this. In fact, I was talking about this with Matt Lee and he kind of pointed out, there's a technical, there's administrative, and then I would even propose that there's the third one, which is physical. And since the HIPAA rule came out in 2013, we really haven't seen a lot of discussion around, hey, it might seem redundant that you're seeing the safeguard maybe more than once, but look at it through the lens that it's implying. Is it tied to a technical requirement, or did they add a new safeguard, change the words a little bit, seems the same, but they're talking about it through one of the other two lenses?
Well, yeah, I mean that is the nature, unfortunately, of cybersecurity controls, frameworks, standards. Is there's a lot of repetition in concept because you're taking security philosophy, right, or
Right.
security science and theory, and you're saying, well, how do we apply this in the real world? And it's a lot of the way you manage a list of hardware devices is not really any different from a security theory perspective than the way you manage the software installed on the devices, right? It's like
Sure.
track it all down, make sure it's all supposed to be there, make sure it's maintained. It's the same for software or hardware, but they're different dimensions to look at, right?
Well, and also you just highlighted something I think is really important. It highlights that the skill set to do some of these things does not require 50 plus years of cybersecurity expertise to help define your organization's asset inventory, right? Like, can
Yeah.
you write? Cool. Can you read? Cool. Like, we're not going to raise the bar too high here. We just need to capture those things that are important to us. And I think you're qualified in most cases, just about anybody in your organization to be tasked with and get that done.
Yeah, probably even the bean counters, right?
Pro- Probably more so.
So, okay, wait, let's just hit the bullets here. So,
Yes.
it's now an international standard with a USHQ,
Yep.
which has it's important to some people. I think people in the U.S. may not realize how important that is for an international standard in the Western world for there to be a footprint in the U.S., but that's
Sure.
particularly important. Or I mean, it really this spun out of Australia, right?
It did. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think not everyone in the world sees Australia as a cybersecurity leader. Although on the geek side, some of the stuff that they're doing in ACSC with the way they index controls, I think that they're leading the world. But only
Yeah.
other security geeks probably realize that. Um, they say that this is a stepping stone framework. They label it that way, right? And
Yeah.
it's specifically to
Iterative
ISO.
process.
Yeah, specifically to ISO 27000. And the idea was you can step up all these stairs to get to this destination. The interesting thing is they named CMMC as another thing that you could step stone towards. The
Yep.
irony is CMMC started out with stepping stones too, and they went in and
Yes.
they removed them, which I thought was
Well, they
horrible.
made. I think to some extent you could argue that they made the steps bigger, like almost like they're not really to code. Like if you're building a staircase, they're not to
Yeah,
code.
you
So you,
can't actually step
yeah,
that high.
step 1 to 2, you're like okay, and then it's like two, 2.5, then 3, and oh wait, there's no more steps. Now you have to jump.
Yeah. UKCE is somewhat of a stepping stone standard, but they don't really talk about it that way, right? They
Yeah, you
don't.
could go back and look at Cyber Essentials and kind of look at the building blocks where as you mature, they ask for more things. I think I don't remember where the levels fall on this, but they start asking for things like now I want to see your policy documents. I want to see proof of an assessment performed, third party assessment. But again, a lot of this, and we see this, on a global scale, is here's a framework or here's a set of guidelines for you to improve your posture. But in many cases, either it's just an example of what good looks like, or it says you should do this, and there's not a lot of examples given. And it's like, well, who's helping me get there? Like, I don't care how great you might be at cybersecurity. There's bound to be something that you either don't understand or can't envision how the organization you're working with, even if it's your own, that it makes sense to implement what's being asked because you don't have true context to the value that it's going to provide to your organization.
Yeah, and then there was NIST CSF, I think, was the original stepping stone standard, but we talked about how maybe that may have crashed and burned. We'll see. I think it's still possible that 2.0 could pull up here with some industry
I'll give
help.
it a win. Let's give it a win. So I'll give NIST CSF a win in version 2 is that they actually called out governance.
Yeah, that was
And the
great.
world listened.
That was great. The piece that I really think was missing was that this is supposed to be a stepping stone standard and a lingua franca, and they provided a framework for guidance and a framework for use cases, but provided neither the guidance nor the use cases. So if you're picking up the standard, it's just a dictionary. There's no instruction book on how to use it, and there's
Please
no
write your
you
own
should
profile of application.
yeah there's not even like a sketch of what stairs look like, which is a bit of a miss. But now Essential
Rise
8
over run.
yeah, Essential 8 though, and I think this is really like, it was a great learning moment, and probably what led to SMB 1001. And I think a lot of people who did adopt Essential 8, they think of it as 8 things, but it's really not. They've got 4 levels. It's P0, P1, P2, P3, or something like
Yep.
that. The level 1, 2, level 0 through 3. And it basically boils down to, at the top level, it's materially equivalent to what CIS is doing. The
Sure.
big problem with Essential 8 was there was not enough guidance, and it was a bit of a road to nowhere, because while in the security world, I really like the ACSC ISM, it doesn't lead to ISO 27K. It doesn't lead anywhere that the world would sort of recognize as a destination. So,
well, now you're describing the same problem the UK has in their own sort of vortex, that if they were to do business outside of the UK, well, now they've got NIS too. And so, not to downplay that the UK requirements aren't valid. It's just, is there recognition for it when you leave, the country boundaries?
well, I don't want to pop the NIS2 bubble because it's coming up, but yeah,
Right.
I got some thoughts on that. So, all
I'm
right,
sure you do. All right.
Did I skip one? No. Okay.
No,
So
you're
CIS
good. You're good.
controls. CIS controls. So I mean, this is really June of last year, but I think most of the world that even knows what CIS controls are, and actually that's a lot of the world now, because you end up with, there's regulators all over the planet now that refer you to CIS controls, which is interesting because in the beginning when CIS took over the controls, they said not a security standard, guys. Don't confuse us with a
Right.
security standard. And the world was like, it doesn't matter. You're better than our security standards. We're going to use you. And so,
Yeah, like what are we measuring this against? Like, what's the definition here? Because this is definitely, there's far more technical safeguards in CIS controls than there are probably any other framework outside of, maybe, I don't know, ITIL would be my next best guess.
yeah, it's definitely more nuanced than ISO 27K. And I could keep going down that list. But okay, so but the 8.1 upgrade, I think you've been deeper in this than I have on the verbiage. But we had updated guidance and descriptions, which I'll let you summarize in a moment. They renamed applications to software, which is sort of funny because we've gone full circle there. It was software and then it was applications, just in the world. It started out software, back in the 80s, I think. And then we started calling these things applications. And CIS is now going, no, let's not confuse people. Let's go back to
Right.
software.
Right.
They added documentation as an asset class, which I think you and I probably appreciate more than most. And every safeguard now has an asset class, because it used to be some of their safeguards weren't attached to things, right?
Yeah.
And now it's very clear what what that safeguard's about. And then they added the NIST CSF 2.0 function map for governance, which unless people actually, I think the NIST 5 functions, now 6 functions, was probably the only part of NIST CSF that was a real win, because people in the
That's
world get
fair.
it, they understand it, and it was something that the world needed, I think. A way to boil down all of security into like a very short list of things that fits on a hand, right?
Sure, right. Yeah, and I think that's, when you look at the why around 8.1, I mean, really what they said is, the goal here was to provide clarity. I think it was context, clarity, and consistency. So there was verbiage changes made, not safeguards moved or changed per se. The type of asset that it was referring to, so documentation now being an asset type or a classification, and that might fall under the language of governance, but again, and we've talked about this with regards to the trust mark, if I start moving everything that was a CIS safeguard that had language of governance into our governance and leadership section, well, then the trust mark would be largely a governance and leadership only framework, and it's not, right? Like, it's a set of standards that are largely technical, and governance from a documentation standpoint is extremely important, but it's not the context of governing your organization, right? Like, and I think that's something that maybe we missed. I hope that version 9 really does dig into what does it mean to provide governance within your organization and apply safeguards like, asset inventory, authorized and unauthorized assets. Those are very important things to have, clearly articulated, and that your employees follow the policy that says, hey, you can't just install software that's not approved. And I think that's kind of the where we're at, right? Like, frameworks have come out, many of them, and again, they're still emphasizing the new ones, security safeguards. I would like to see more emphasis on governance. Like, you can't do technical safeguards well if governance is not well defined.
Well, it doesn't help that no one likes to read anymore,
Or
despite the fact
right.
that yeah, or right, they want AI to do it for them. I think if you went back to information workers of 50 years ago and you explained to someone who knew nothing about technology, you said, okay, we have policy governance, we have procedures, we have standards, we have guidelines, we have regulations. They're all different types of governance. Here's are the use cases of them. I think people could navigate those better 50 years
Sure.
ago. And this is me just being super jaded
Well,
about
that's
where
a
we are as
testament
humans.
to,
But
I mean, you could use NIST 1 as an example. Then, if you go there, if you go back in time to the early 2000s when they published it for the first time, your spreadsheet rows look more like, Word docs within a row, right? Like, and then fast forward, and now they really condensed, shrunk, and removed a lot of that language because, well, one would argue, man, we were probably way too prescriptive, and now I would argue maybe not prescriptive enough.
yeah. All right. So the news really is it's almost not news, which is that if you're using CIS controls, you should be aware of 8.1, not because it changes the security that you should have implemented, but because it makes it easier to implement the security you have not already implemented. Just the guidance is great. The reference information available with the standard is much more clear and much more I think um, it probably correlates more effectively with the tools we actually have and the way we actually do things.
Yeah, and I think to some extent one would argue that 8.1 came out to address mappings for other frameworks that have made substantial changes to what they have in their
That yeah,
framework.
yeah, it wasn't just NIST CSF2. They there was a
No.
whole slew of mappings that came out after the 8.1. All right, NIST 2. Okay, here we are with the NIST 2, and I did a history dive here, so I'm gonna do the quick history book, which was NIST 1 came out in 2016. Um, I honestly, I knew about it, but I don't know anyone that was itchy about the NIST 1 directive. NIST 2 was enacted, there was some research leading up to it, enacted in 22, enforced at beginning of 23. But what that enforcement means is, because of the way the EU works, is it's just like an order for the national governments to go pass laws that match NIS2 so that everyone's got the same set of rules. And this was the really funny thing. As of only a few weeks ago, 23 of 27 member states did not implement the laws. So they're all it's most of Europe has not that they're not in process, right? But they didn't meet deadline. So we're not really sure what those laws are going to look like yet because they're not done. But they're happening right now, and clearly we're going to hear a lot more about this year.
Yeah, so I mean, something to point out is the shift over the last 8 years. We went from what they consider to be 6 categories or 6 what's the word I'm looking for? The scope expanded from 6 to 15, right? So we went from certain things not being included at all. Like one would argue, like the digital, if you provide digital services, that was largely not included. And there are others. And then they added some of the adjacent ones, right? Like, so if you were part of like food services distribution and some other things that they put some definite scoping to. And you could almost say that they like, well, we had 6 before, let's put in everything. And then let's have our participating countries all, spend the next 6 to 8 months, come up with your own interpretation, and then put that into effect, into law in August of this 2024. We haven't seen anything yet come out of penalties that I know of as a result of that going into effect. And you wonder like what countries decided to like, hey, how about you guys decide what it should look like? We'll just adopt what you do.
So there's a little bit of backstory here. The U.S. had the same problem because we had a critical infrastructure, and it was super narrow, right? And then it was less than 10 years ago, I believe. At some point, we expanded that definition to include, critical infrastructure can't even function without these other things, right? And that was largely what they did here. They padded out. They've got essential and important.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't already looked it up, I wouldn't be able to tell you which one's more important, essential or important. But I did look. Essential is more important, I think, is what that.
Well, and it's interesting because they have digital providers under important, and then they have digital infrastructure under essential, right? Which makes sense. Really hard to be a digital provider if you can't, resolve DNS.
Yeah. So that's presumably which side's Cloudflare on?
Right. That's a great question. I would argue that they fall into both camps, right? Because they provide enough services at this point that they are no longer just infrastructure. They are now a digital provider.
Yeah. It's a little mushy. But the point is, if your company is doing something, if you're in an industry that the citizenry can't do without, right? There's now this giant list of cybersecurity requirements that are mandatory, right? So this is not the liability framework we have in the U.S., right? This is you have to do these things or fines. And it's mandatory risk assessments, mandatory implementations, things you have to do, and it sounds like there's personal accountability, not just business accountability for management. If you as a manager don't exercise due care, they're saying that you as a manager have done something wrong. So
let's do a little bit of I don't want to call it comparison, but I think there's some overlap here that's kind of important to point out. We talked about SMB 1001 at the beginning, and now with some of the revision and the NIS2 minimum measures, you see some interesting things that happen literally across the board, right? Like, so cybersecurity training and practice for basic computer hygiene. Where have we heard that before? We need to have things like the use of multi-factor authentication. We need to have things like a business continuity plan. So I think one of the coolest things that is happening right now as we go into 2025 is that the language that is largely adopted from either existing frameworks or being put into new ones is like your basic cyber hygiene probably would look almost identical regardless of what framework you pick up today and choose to follow.
That's been a big change over the last 10 years because I remember extremely prescriptive legislation 10 years ago. HIPAA comes to mind, right? 2013 HIPAA Omnibus, where it was very prescriptive, very specific, but basically the people who wrote the rules didn't even understand the technology, and the technology changes, right?
Right.
And largely, we've seen regulators move towards we're going to set the bar this high, and you better follow the guidance of your security industry, right?
Right.
So, as security industry leaders, we're basically telling everyone, like, doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? This is how you do. This is the right way to do security awareness. This is the right way to do incident lifecycle management. This is the right way to do hygiene.
And there's definitely, I would argue that there's not a lot of discrepancy between the way in which they are all recommending that those are achieved. The differences are more of in how detailed do they get and the way they give examples or guidance to achieve those goals.
Mostly. I'm still waiting for the world to agree on how we report incidents.
Yeah, so that's interesting. The how. I don't think that necessarily is going to be an easy conclusion. I mean, you saw things like CMMC 72 hours, and there's others that follow that same model of the how much time you have. But then, how, like, I was looking at the one for CMMC or the DoD, and it's like, fill out this form. It's like, okay, we've all seen how forms work. Everybody has a form. They're all different. They all use different variables or language for their schema and what identifies certain identifiable areas, right? Like, the military, a military record or profile for an individual is going to be very different than a medical profile for the same individual in a hospital. Yet
Well,
there may be a whole bunch of overlap.
I take it back. I take it back because the world is in agreement. Ask a lawyer and ask a bureaucrat is the current system we have, because we have we here in the US, we've got states contradicting each other. We've got the
Sure.
federal government contradicting the states, and it's like, as a security professional, I don't even want to have an opinion in that place. Like, that's a question for a lawyer.
You know what? And then that's fair. And what I would say, because of that, you literally have to look and go, as a business in the private sector, what's the most restrictive? And can we do that and maintain still in
It,
business?
if you're lucky, and that it works that way, because
Right.
I've literally seen you have to a less than and more than contradict each other. You have to wait at least, and you have to do it no more than, right? So
Sure. Your
you have to
XY axis
report
has got X's on it.
you have to report within 24 hours, but no earlier than 72 hours.
Right.
Like, and I've seen that, and
And I think some of those, though, it's context to what is being asked of you, right? Like, what are we referring to and who are we reporting to? Because reporting to law enforcement is very different than, say, calling all your patients
well,
and letting
that's
them
where it
know that
comes
it
up.
happened. Yeah.
That's where it comes up, where you get the privacy laws that contradict the law enforcement protocols. So,
Right. It's
all right,
so much fun. Oh, my
CMMC.
favorite.
So it is surprisingly difficult to figure out what is happening with CMMC, because it's changed so much. So, guys, you can't go Google this and read like a random like landing page in someone's firm with some guidance. Even if it's 6 months old, the dates might be wrong. You do have to go check the DoD and Cyber IB. But here's the current situation, which is uh, we had DFARS back in 2016. ... Not good enough. CMMC was 1.0 came out, turned out to be a draft in 2020. Then we had 2.0 came out in 2021, and it took 3 years to turn that into just this past December. We've gone into enforcement, and what that means is the first phase of rollout. So for the next year, basically for all of 2025, the DoD is, and they're not getting more specific than this. They say where applicable, they're requiring people that are bidding on contracts to either have level 1 or level 2 self assessments. If you're a level 1, no POAMs allowed. If you're a level 2, you can have a 180-day POAM. But it doesn't even seem to be every contract, and I think the DoD is realizing that this is going to be hard. But next year it's going to be um, uh, certification. So not just self-attestation, right? We're going to actually require certification on level 2. But again, where applicable, which means the DoD can leave it out on contracts if they want. The following year, for all of 27. Level 3 is going to begin to be required. And this requires DIBTAC certification. So the government auditors are actually going to be coming in there. But again, it's where applicable, they can choose to leave it out of the contract, presumably if they don't expect enough bids. But the goal is by the end of 27, 100% of DoD contracts are going to require CMMC attestations or certification at level 2 and 3, this is perhaps only the security people in the world realize how big this is right now. If this doesn't change course, really over the next 4 years, we're going to see a big movement in IT cyber because DoD contractors and their retainers represent a huge chunk of the U.S. economy. I mean, someone may only have a small DoD contract, right? Or their customer may have a small DoD contract, right? But the DoD has a lot of leverage here to drag people in. Looks like we lost Chris for a moment. I'm presuming he's rebooting now. But this is a big deal. I think for people that do have contracts or their customers have contracts, this year is really the year of self-assessment. And if you're a service provider, you really need to be in position to support your customers through that self-attestation process. So that means that you're going to need to support them in data collection, in how to figure out if they are at level 1 or level 2, which contracts can they bid on, and how do they, what kind of liability are they putting themselves in if they attest to something, right? Because there's a big difference here in CMMC. In NIST 800-171 and DFARS, which came before, the government came up with a list of practices, and they said, okay, you figure out how good you need to do these and which one of these practices you need to implement. And then as the supplier, you just did the things that were reasonable. But the DoD is now saying, not only do you have to do this very specific list of practices, but this is how you determine whether you're doing the thing or not. And it's a very specific criteria. If you're someplace in the shades of gray of I've got half an implementation, that may not count. And you may be in trouble if you claim it when you shouldn't have. So that's what's coming the next few years here. And there's hundreds of thousands of contractors that are impacted. So this is really, yeah. So it takes so much time to reach maturity. It's true. I mean, this is both from the government side and from the contractor side. I would argue it takes longer from the government side to figure out what they want to do and then figure out a system to get hundreds of thousands of contractors in line. But if you're starting from zero and you're trying to reach like a certified level 2, I don't think you could do that any faster than 2 years from start to finish. And that's if you put the right resourcing in place on day one. So if you don't really have a strong cybersecurity program and you begin and you're maybe you've done NIST 800-171 attestations before for government contracts, but you've never really put the rigorous assessments in place and you're trying to get certified, it could be a 2-year journey. You don't just get to say you have an inventory because you have an RMM or something like that. You actually have to show the inventory to an auditor and they're going to score it. Here we have CJ on his phone. That laptop's really treating you well today.
I don't want to talk about it.
I won't make you. Well, I was just, riffing on this is going to be hard. Hundreds of thousands of contractors that are going to be impacted. And those contractors, I mean, they're implementing this security, not just for themselves, but usually for their whole businesses. And this is really going to drag the whole IT industry in a very specific direction, I think.
I would agree with that.
But people are still arguing about this stuff. I mean, so we have the criteria that's out there. The actual rules have finalized, but there's still a bit of dickering between the government and the industry on how to interpret some of this stuff, and it may come down to case law or actual life.
And did you talk about the MSP part of this? Because I think this is one, and there's the MSP piece of like where do they sit with their clients that are, requiring to meet some of those criteria, and then there's others. But one of the things that has come up recently is, and you can attest this because you are in the GRC space, is that there are GRC vendors that are just, telling their partners, we help you meet the CMMC requirements, and not being really clear about what that means. And MSPs that are working really hard towards helping their clients are starting to find out things like maybe we need more help than we thought. Maybe we need more than the tools to be successful. And I'm not sure what you've seen, but like you're in the GRC space.
I touched on part of that already, although I didn't. We should talk about the what this means for the MSP specifically. But um, here's the thing I'm seeing. I'm seeing MSPs that say, well, we don't have access to that data. Yes, we have remote control of these customer systems, but we don't access the data. We
Sure.
just theoretically have access to that data, and this is a big
Right.
deal. And what I'm telling partners is you need to maintain an enclave, or you need to use dedicated hardware to manage those computers that have, particularly if you're at level 2 where there's CUI involved.
Right.
You need to have an enclave, or you need to have separate machines, because if you theoretically have access, that means you have access, right? It doesn't matter if you've downloaded that data or not.
That's a pretty clear defining, I think that's what the dictionary actually might say.
Well, but this is a big deal right now, because inside the DoD, there's a bit of discussion over, is it reasonable to expect how much of that is reasonable, and if the MSP maintains an enclave, do they then need to go get their own certification for that enclave? And I think that's where the question is right now. Does the MSP also, or do they count as a sub? Right?
Well, I mean, and I think we should be careful here because I think there's some other elements to this too, right? So if I am the General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, some of these others that we know are, DoD direct contractors, we're starting to hear that they're asking their subs to be like, hey, we're going to require you to be assessed. Now, we've seen mixtures of whether or not they're asking them to be audited, by someone under the C3 POW, a certified assessor in that realm, versus like we just want proof that you've been third party assessed, that you're not just telling us, yeah, that you've done the things.
Yeah, and this, I mean, the we're gonna hit the skids on this one by the end of the year, because through all of history so far in cybersecurity requirements of the DoD, right back to
Yeah.
2015 when they first standardized it, it was basically like self-graded homework, right? And now, not only is there very specific assessment criteria, but you don't get to self-assess anymore. If you're at level 2
Right.
or higher, by the end of the year, an outside assessor is going to be coming in, and these are I don't even know if it's fair to call them assessments. They're actually audits, because they've got a very specific scoring criteria,
Right.
and they are individually certified on how to do that. There's
Right.
no there's no subjectivity to it. It's 100% objective, and there's no way a GRC platform can do that. Yeah, I mean, my GRC platform, you can self attest. I think I'm this secure, and you can put a piece of evidence on file. But the GRC platform's not going to go and actually do the thing, actually do
Right.
security, right?
Well, and I think that's the thing that I hope we see a shift in is that, um, we've got it, and we saw this in other categories in cybersecurity, right? Like if you implement our tool, fill in the blank, whatever it is. I won't get into we don't want to make it too specific. People might know who I'm talking about, but like we stop all threats, right? Like you've seen language like that in marketing and advertising for security products and services. We've also seen use our platform. I won't even use that it's a GRC platform. I've seen them just drop that language anyways. And they say, fast track your compliance by leveraging our tool. Like, okay, get done in 90 days or less. And I'm like, well, okay. So if we were talking about the trust mark, I don't have anybody that I know of that has done this in less than 4 months. Like,
and
Yeah.
not without trying. And they have other frameworks under their belt, or they've said, "Hey, I did ISO 27001, I did SOC 2. I really wish I'd have done the Trustmark first." Why? Because it looked at my entire organization, not an enclave, not a piece. It looked at the whole thing, and you're starting to see this happen in other frameworks too, where they're like, "We're no longer just looking at one piece. We want to see your whole organization." And I think that's one of the things that I'm curious about as we move through 2025 and beyond. Frameworks changing some of that language to say it's no longer about this one little piece that's in a data center, or this one little piece that hosts XYZ. It's now all of it. So I don't know. I'm just curious what your thoughts on that too.
Uh, so I mean, we do some of our own assessments, and we have an assessment methodology. And I only do whole organizations. I don't let people I don't I don't let people like draw a box around part of their business and assess that.
Why
I
not?
always go to the I
I
always
mean, you
go to the org boundary.
give them the right colored pencils, and they can make a really, pretty picture.
Yeah, I mean, I yeah, yeah, no, it's you've seen this in healthcare for years, right? Oh, that machine doesn't have PHI on it, right? And the first observation is really it doesn't. Are you sure about that? The second observation is that doesn't matter. you
Right.
know.
Right. Wow, yeah, we could go down a serious.
All
I
right, all
see a
right.
future series here happening.
Let's touch on a couple more. FFIEC cat. So uh, the financial services industry is really funny because the the banking sector has simultaneously fended off every attempt at standardizing their governance framework. I mean, there's really no one in position to say this is the standard for the cybersecurity
Right.
industry, or sorry, for the financial services industry. And they
Right.
and the banks want to keep it that way, but at the same time, a lot of the banks, particularly the bottom half in size, are saying, "Please, regulators, we need some guidance." And so FFIEC, if you rewind a number of years ago before the cat came along, which is a spreadsheet basically, they used to point you to resources like NIST and CIS, and then they came out with this spreadsheet, which was a shortcut for businesses that didn't know how to produce risk assessments to basically be able to do a little baby risk assessment for their
Sure.
small financial services org. But they're kicking it to the curb because a spreadsheet, like not knowing how to run a risk assessment, right? Add a spreadsheet does not equal a risk assessment is really the problem. And cybersecurity changes and FFIEC is just really they want to get out of the business of maintaining that spreadsheet. So I actually noticed there was a period earlier this year where the spreadsheet disappeared completely, and I was like, where'd that go?
Yeah, it
Um,
got dropped from their website, right?
yeah, it got dropped, and then it came back with a banner that says, "Okay, we're not going to make it disappear, but it is going to sunset." And they put the sunset date on, which is end of August. And the whole financial services industry, anyone that has to clear dollars, U.S. dollars, right, is trying to figure out. This isn't just in the U.S., right? This is any bank or money broker in the world that has to worry about dollar clearing is trying to figure out how are we going to do risk assessments. We've never done those before. We just fill out the spreadsheet every year, right? And I gotta turn CJ on here. There he is. So in any case, the cat's going away, and there's really not any replacement other than the whole cyber industry, right? And
And I think it's important to point out some of the language that they've used, and I think this is where and this is one of the reasons why I think we put it into this stack, and that is what's the plan, right? So they give some direction around NIST and CIS and some others, and it's like, well, but those aren't specific to banking, right? In fact, Dan, I just drew a blank on his last name. He and I have been having significant conversations around, what do you tell your clients in the banking space who have relied on the FFIC to the CAT for their assessment tool for a long time that has questions that are unique to the space that are in, and that's, I think, part of the reason why, to your point, they brought it back. They're like, hey, we can't just delete this. um, but I think it's important that if you're in the space and you're providing guidance around helping businesses of any kind, I don't care what the vertical is, think about the vertical that they are in, and regardless of what they've told you that they need to comply with, are they like through the lens of their organization, not just the whole like, oh well, to be secure you should do X. Okay, well, what does that look like in my industry? Because it might not be exactly the same as it is for manufacturing is to say healthcare.
Well, that's true. And if you're self-attesting, it's a big question mark, right? But I think if you're securing a commercial assessment from a reputable assessment firm,
Right.
and they do rigorous assessments, not cheapskate assessments, which also exist in the world, they're going to be looking at those things, right? And
Sure.
and all those assessors are going to be familiar with the needs of the financial services industry because they're big cyber buyers, right? So I think if you go out and you get a standards-based assessment from a real assessment firm, service shop, I think that they're going to be bringing that expertise in, and I think that this might be part of a shift away from self-attestation because I don't think it makes sense for an organization to assess their own risk and security. I don't think it's not that simple. I think that you
Well, I
need an
mean,
outsider to look in.
here, let's ask a loaded question. When you self-attest, what does that really mean? It means that I, upon my own judgment, have made this decision, right? And you're seeing like SME 1001, self-attestment costs money. And the reason why it does in their case is they're saying you're got skin in the game, and if we're going to give you, for lack of a better word, the sticker saying that this is transpired is because you've made a commitment. You've sort of signed the blood oath, if you will. If you look at an insurance questionnaire that gets filled out, you are obligated to do what you say you are doing in there. If you want any sort of claim to get paid out because something has happened, you had better be able to prove that you're doing all those things that are in there. That is in itself a self-attestment. Sorry, a self-attestation, right? You're saying, I have answered all these questions truthfully. I did not lie on any of them. And when we say did not lie on any of them, this is where I think third party, even if it's just to help you self-attest, is because you may not know what the truthful answer actually is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I know when I do interviews, we get through we get pretty close to the truth in the interview because there's context around the conversation. Before I ask someone what they're doing, I say, this is how you should evaluate, in 30 seconds. Are you doing this thing? This is how you know if you're doing this thing or not. And I think sometimes that framing's necessary.
All I can hear in my head is the Tom Cruise scene where he's talking to in The Few Good Men, right? You can't handle the truth. I rest my case, Your Honor.
All right, I'm gonna move here, but this is a big deal because every single financial services business that has to clear dollars, if they're smallish, right, which is the vast majority of them are smallish, right? They're using this spreadsheet, and they got to stop, and they're going to do something else. So.
Well, it's not that. I think it's more to clarify that the FFIC is no longer going to provide it. It doesn't mean that the tool doesn't still have some validity to it. And so I think that's maybe more of like, take with a grain of salt. Tomorrow you're not going to just stop using what you've been using for the last 10 years just because it's no longer supported, because then you lose your baseline too. You lose that KPI that you had.
Maybe I'm like a little hard on the people I'm assessing, but if I was working in the FDIC and I came into an organization and they said I use this sunset spreadsheet to do my assessment, I would
okay. So to clarify, I wasn't proposing that you shouldn't do anything else. I'm saying that it doesn't just become obsolete because they've decided. I mean, I think they even said it. They're like, we don't see a reason to continue to maintain this when we're one body, one framework, or one tool, and you have all of these other frameworks and tools out there that are progressing faster than we can, right? Like there's more resources being allocated to how an assessment is performed than what we can do anymore. So yes, to your point, I'm not proposing that you make a sunset tool the only thing you're using, but I think you can't just delete it from the equation because August of 2025 it's gone.
Yeah. All right, we got two more to cover here.
All right,
and then maybe we can declare a winner.
Sure.
So
you win.
We got so GLBA has been around for 20 years, but there was a rule change recently And
Sure.
GLBA says that organizations need to do, if you're a commercial business, there's some due diligence, due care obligations around cyber and specifically privacy,
Right.
financial data privacy inside the U.S. And if you're being regulated by a financial services regulator, go talk to your regulator like the SEC, the NCUA, whatever. But if you're not regulated by one of those because you're a car dealership, et cetera, right?
Right.
Maybe you're selling iPhones, right? But you're doing them with those pay over 36-month agreements, right? You're collecting financial data. You also need to take care of people's financial privacy. But what happened? It was really end of 23, right? Specific list of controls. You had to name an
June.
ISO or CISO. You had to perform risk assessments annually. You have to operate a cybersecurity program. You need to perform reasonable cybersecurity standards.
Hygiene. Yeah.
Yeah.
Protect the
So,
data.
but I think as more time grows between when that rule change happened and today, right? The
Yeah, we're a
enforcement
year
is
and a
just
half in. We
yeah,
are like, yeah, June 2023. That went into law, and we're still seeing. I mean, we just saw this in last summer, right? We saw last summer, a year into the program, one of the biggest data breaches for car dealerships ever, unprecedented, global impact. I can attest to this. My son working for a car dealership, how it directly impacted his payroll within the organization, and just witnessing, like, I remember going and picking up my car after just a simple oil change, and the person that cashed us out was like near tears because of the overwhelming, daunting task of just trying to run our credit card for the 30 some dollars for the oil change.
yeah. I mean, so basically, what this means is now, if you're in one of these businesses and you have I'm going to use the B word, the breach word, right? If
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
declares it's a breach,
sure.
not only do you have all this legal liability from people who can sue you, right? You now have a regulator that can come in and not just hit you with a small fine, but really a punitive measure, right, to make you go implement the security plus some, right?
Well, I mean,
Um,
we've been doing the carrot stuff for too long, right? If you go back to when some of the healthcare HIPAA stuff went into effect, you had all these incentives to go from paper to digital, and prove a security model, and go through your annual risk assessments. And now it's 2025, and it's like, hey, you got all this money to do this, you didn't do this. We're no longer playing nice anymore.
yeah, so that's continuing to chew people's sides, and
So
I think it's
since you
going to
jumped
happen.
to it,
Yeah, well, HIPAA. Okay, let me back up and say I was really excited about this update like 3 years ago, and it took so long. I'm no longer excited.
yeah, you're
I
like,
stopped
duh.
using the HIPAA Appendix C. I'm now telling people there's 19 things you have to do from HIPAA. Plus, you need to pick another security standard because HIPAA's garbage, and that's what I tell people now.
So what's interesting about this, though, and we're obviously in public comment right now. The one thing that popped up for me was, again, this is repeating everything we've talked about on this entire episode around what is basic cyber hygiene, and we're now seeing large hospital systems actually pushing back on what one would argue is today's norm, should be today's norm. Like, and then you look closer and you can go, wait a second, okay, I can see how telling a hospital that they have to have systems back online in 72 hours because we said so doesn't necessarily have bearing on their ability to provide care or not. But I think that's kind of what this is getting at, right? Like, they're saying, at a minimum, I don't care what hospital it is, if you provide patient care, there starts to be an issue after 72 hours of not being able to access the pertinent information about your patients.
Well, I think I don't know. I think they should raise the standard as high as they can. I'm getting scared, frankly, because our health systems are consolidated now. We
Yeah,
saw
very
we
much
saw
so.
we saw this supply chain issue, which I'm not even sure was a HIPAA I don't even know if there's HIPAA impact. There was a pharmacy problem, right? And it was at the supply chain level, and it wasn't even necessarily private health data, right? So now
Correct.
we've got the healthcare supply chain and we saw this literally this year. There was a moment where people couldn't get their insulin, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, imagine if it was one of the major health systems that just like down for weeks, what would be the impact, right?
Well, and I think that's an important distinction that maybe needs to happen here. Like in the, like with the NIS2, you have distinctions around categories of what is, essential versus informative, right? Or informational, or however they said it, I forget now. Is that not similar case here to what we're dealing with, particularly around HIPAA? Is that some of the proposed are tied to maybe it does need to be a little bit different in one segment, that supply chain for things like pharmaceutical versus, patient care.
All right, we're over time here, Chris.
Okay.
Can you hold?
All
Can
right.
you hold back? Can you hold back time for 1 minute here? I would
I
love
got
to
1
hear
minute.
what's new.
TikTok.
What's new? What's new in Trustmark?
Well, we renamed it. You can't tell. It's no longer the what it was before. It is now GTIA, Cybersecurity Trustmark, which will involve rebranding, new logos, new stickers, that whole thing. I think the biggest change that I can say is we go into releasing version 2 sometime near the end of Q1 of 25, is that education and clarity around best practices is paramount. We can write all the new safeguards, change safeguards, reword safeguards, but the reality is the education on how to implement safeguards successfully, getting the spirit of the safeguard essentially. And then the other one is, what does hand holding look like? And I heard a comedian say this, if we could just stop putting up signs, right? Like you go to the mall and it says, don't lean on the railing. Well, that basically says that at some point someone went over the railing because they leaned on it. And therefore we're giving you the don't lean on railing, right? And the comedian's point was like, maybe we should allow for a little more natural selection. If you need me to hold your hand to cross the road, we might have some problems here because I can only hold so many hands at one time. But if you're asking, like, I'm not sure how to interpret the sign and where I should walk when I cross the road, that's what we're here for, right? We want to take what we know is the spirit of the safeguard, make sure that it's applicable and can easily be understood so that you can go and apply it in your organization. I don't want to tell you what tools to use. I don't want to tell you how many licenses you need or things like that, how much money you should spend, how much time you should spend on it, those kind of things. That's up to you. But for everything else, and we want to make that very clear as we go into 2025. Hence, we have the playbooks that were built by ConnectWise and the participants from the Trustmark Working Group, Ready, Aware, Resilient. And then you're going to start seeing video content and clips, educational clips, to really help hone in where you might be struggling.
All right. Well, I will let you take off if you need to run. I'm just gonna. We'll look at here's the logo, guys. Here's the new GTIA. Oh, it's not even coming up. Forget it. It's at the bottom.
Boom. There it is. G.
And my next slide's not coming up either. But next week we're talking Left of Boom with Marvin B from the IT Business Podcast, and we're bringing a legal expert. It's the first of a 3-part series. So we're going to, over that 3-part series, next week is going to be, what you should be doing to prevent an incident. We're going to follow that up with January 5th in the evening. We're going to talk about incident lifecycle management. And then a few weeks out on a Friday, we are going to Marvin's going to come back and join us, and we're going to be talking about the cyber insurance process, how to make your claim, how to protect your claim, how to make sure you get your money back. So with that, until next time, thanks, everyone.